What's up, everyone, and welcome to the 11th episode of the Joshua Perry Show. Of course, I am your host, former Buckeye captain and national champ, former NFL and current Big Ten Network analyst, Joshua Perry. This is the podcast where we talk sports, life, and everything else. We are broadcasting on the Zedia Network. Follow at Zedia Network on Twitter for big-time podcasts and great content. Todd Pennington with Columbus-based Revolution Mortgage is a proud sponsor of the Joshua Perry Show. If you are looking to refinance into a competitive rate or cash out for debt consolidation or for home improvements, now is the time with historically low rates, and Todd can help you out. Todd should also be your go-to guy if you're looking to purchase a new home or get out of renting. So contact Todd Pennington at 614-390-9520 or visit revolutionmortgage.com/T Pennington for more information. Revolution Mortgage is an equal housing lender, NMLS ID 1686046. All right, folks, got a little doozy in here today. First off, can't talk, so bear with me, stumbling over my words, but it's been a long one. I was driving all Sunday, and then I put a real estate deal in contract, had some closings today, so it's been busy. Bear with me, but I got a great show for you. What I'm going to do is a little bit of a recap of the weekend in the Big Ten. It was a great weekend. We had some great results, some great games, and I think we learned a ton, and I want to process all the things that we learned. So we're going to go through Ohio State and their game against Nebraska and what we learned there, talk about Wisconsin, Graham Mertz, very interesting game there. Penn State gets dropped. We'll talk about that as they lead into Ohio State this upcoming weekend. Purdue was surprising. Northwestern found a quarterback. Rutgers throws a party at the football. In Michigan, Minnesota, we have to reconcile with our bad take. Andrew Zolden and I'll handle the reconciliation process. But that's what we got on the slate for today. Once we're finished with that, I'm going to get you out of here on my word. I don't have any other stuff I want to talk about, but I got a good word for you this week. I think you all appreciate it. So we'll dive right on into it. I'll start off with the Buckeyes, the hometown team for me in their game against Nebraska. Final score 52-17, and it was probably the ugliest half 100-point game for Buckeye fans to consume. I think there was such a buildup in the offseason of us talking about how great this team was going to be. Elite quarterback coming back, one of the best, if not the best, offensive line in America, a defense that was veteran in the middle in the linebacker spot, Sean Wade coming back, who's going to lead that young secondary, and some talent on the D-line, although many of those guys are kind of new talents, rather unknown. They're still very talented players. And we come out in that game, and it's a back-and-forth type of situation in the first half for a little bit. Nebraska's racking up some points. I think people are kind of starting to question a couple of things. Number one, first question is this defense as good as advertised? I think early in the game there were a lot of really bad angles from Ohio State's defense. There were some uncharacteristic fundamental flaws where players were going underneath blocks instead of staying over the top, where players weren't even getting off blocks. I think players were getting off of their assignment, trying to adjust to the quarterback run, and specifically when there's a second quarterback in the game lining up, you're on high alert for just some trickery and some BS anyway. I think that caught Ohio State off guard defensively. And then up front, there was a new rotation going on, so those guys were trying to figure it out. That was the first thing that jumped off, because Nebraska was able to take the ball down the field pretty successfully a couple of times. And like I said, they hit a couple of plays. Luke McCaffrey gashed them for about 50 yards one time. Adrian Martinez was just able to run. And so we were like, whoa, wait a minute. Like, Nebraska shouldn't be doing that to us. The second thing that stood out was in the first half, Ohio State was struggling. And I think this was not just the first half. It was kind of the whole game, was struggling to run the ball, I think, the way that we were used to seeing last year. J.K. Dobbins was a guy who was going to pick up yards regardless of the situation, regardless of when he was contacted, whether that was before the line of scrimmage or after. And our running game just isn't there yet. I think Trey Sermon is going to be a very good weapon for Ohio State. I don't think he's a between-the-tackles type of running back. He's a smaller frame guy, and he does better on edges. Master Teague, on the other hand, I think can get some of those yards up inside, but I also believe that his explosion is still recovering from his Achilles injury. I think Steel Chambers was a really good changeup for the Buckeyes, but overall, the run game left a little bit to be desired. And so we went into halftime in that game. We're like, ooh, what's going on? We come out in the second half and blow the game wide open. Nebraska doesn't score another point. It was, I think, a 10-point game at halftime. And that was after Ohio State put together a couple late scores. And, it's like, okay, if we get the ball coming out and score, then we feel fine. That's exactly what they did. And ends up being a little bit nicer on the box score than it was during the actual game. Bright spot, Justin Fields. Dude's amazing. I know some people are probably going to sit back who didn't really watch the game and say, 276 and a couple of touchdowns isn't super impressive. Trevor Lawrence throwing for 400 yards, which is true. But Justin Fields was damn near perfect, 21 of 22 or something like that. Like I said, 276 yards, a couple touchdowns through the air, one rushing touchdown, and was very efficient. I think he took chances when he needed to. I believe he also ate the ball when it was a responsible time to eat the ball. He's playing really good football, and our wide receiver core is amazing. Chris Olave got cleaned up on a hit. Nebraska, I think, was headhunting. Whether you think the hits were legal or not, they weren't fundamental football hits, if that makes sense. And they did it constantly, so I know they were headhunting. And more power to them. It's a violent game, so you got to do what you got to do. But our receivers, they really stood up in the wake of that, and they were taking some of those hits, but they were getting a ton of yards. Garrett Wilson will be the new weapon of choice in this offense. You can quote me on that. I think Chris Olave is obviously going to do really well this year, but Garrett Wilson's going to be the guy. I think he's unguardable. And I'm not talking about just throughout Big Ten play. I don't know how many guys across America can actually guard Garrett Wilson. So I'll be looking forward to that. On the flip side of that game, Nebraska came out really hot, and then they fell flat. I think there's a lot of good to take away for the game from Nebraska. It was really competitive in the first half, and a lot more competitive than anybody thought it was going to be. They forced Ohio State to take some chances on fourth downs trying to convert. They made Ohio State play them honest on defense, which was a big deal. And so for me, I thought Nebraska was going to be a team that might only win 2 or 3 games this year, and they still could be that team. But they also, the way they played Ohio State in the first half of that game, it kind of says otherwise to me, where they're probably more improved, and they've got a nice little outlook. So I think there's good to take away from both of those games. I'm excited, obviously, to watch my Buckeyes as they head on their quest to make it to the college football playoff, but I'll be curious to see at the end of the year how Nebraska shapes up. And as we'll get through this, you'll see the Big Ten West is definitely wide open. Wisconsin played a really good game, but, Graham Mertz has some COVID questions that haven't been answered up to this point. Iowa went down. Northwestern found a quarterback. Illinois is terrible. So, there are a lot of things to take away. And who knows, Nebraska could be toward the top of the West, not to mention Minnesota, could be toward the top of the West at the end of the year. So we'll hop over to that Wisconsin game that was on Friday against Illinois. Graham Mertz, starting quarterback for Wisconsin, stepped in for Jack Cohn, was amazing, simply. And I'll ask this question before I get into the breakdown of the game. Jack Cohn was a very good quarterback for Wisconsin a year ago because he was able to manage the game. They threw the ball mostly 10 yards and under and mostly between the hashes, and he was successful doing that. They took some shots with Quintez Cephas when they needed to, but they really didn't ask him to do those kinds of things. They had Jonathan Taylor toting the rock, and they had an offensive line that was amazing. And now we get Graham Mertz, who had the passing numbers. He took the shots down the field, utilized the tight ends well, found the running backs out of the backfield. He did it with an O-line that's not as good as it was last year, and a run game that is way worse than it was a year ago. And so my question becomes, was Graham Mertz supposed to be the starter this year? And what I mean by that is, were they hiding him behind Jack Cohn because Cohn was the veteran guy and everything else, and they wanted to give him his chances? Because I think if we're comparing, and it's only a small sample size, and I don't see the practices, so I can't make that judgment. If I'm comparing what I saw from Jack Cohn last year to what we saw from Graham Mertz on Friday, I don't think the competition's that close. And not to get too far down this one, because I respect the hell out of Jack Cohn and what he did a year ago. But if Mertz is able to play some more games this year after we figure out what's going on with his little COVID situation, could be a situation where Jack Cohn hops in the portal. But to talk about that game, 95.2% completion. This guy probably thought he was going to have the best completion percentage in the conference for the weekend until Justin Fields went on the field noon Saturday and ruined that for him, but did a great job. 248 yards. So again, not, 400-yard passing game, but it was a really good passing game. 5 touchdowns, which is a big stat, no interceptions. And he utilized his tight end, Jake Ferguson, to perfection. And for context, Jake Ferguson scored 2 touchdowns last year. I believe he had 3 touchdowns in the game, or it was vice versa on the stat. Again, I'm tired. But you get the point here. He's finding his rhythm and what he needs to do in that offense. They got a cat named Davis, and he was a deep threat that Mertz was able to hit in stride, and it was awesome. And, again, to contextualize this, I said this a week ago, but Graham Mertz was a top 70 recruit. He was the number 3 pro-style quarterback in his class, and he was the number 1 player in the state of Kansas. He was a very highly touted player, and he played like one in his first start. So a lot of credit to him. I don't even want to talk about the flip side of that game. Illinois is not very good. Their quarterback play was abysmal. Brandon Peters threw for 87 yards. They could not stop anybody defensively, which is a shame because I love Lovie Smith. I respect his system. I think his defense played really well, especially toward the end of last year, because they were able to take the ball away and they couldn't come up with anything. And it's kind of a throwaway year if you're Illinois. Like, I don't know if you can really fire Lovie coming out of this year, but my hope is that he gets a little bit of patience and he's able to maybe turn this thing around by the end of the year, because I just like him. I like him as a coach. Moving forward, Penn State gets dropped. This was one of my predictions. I said that Indiana had a really good chance to upset Penn State, and it happened. And it didn't happen the way that I thought it would, because I thought Indiana's offense was going to be a lot better and way more explosive, but it happened. And so we'll get into this. Sean Clifford, Penn State's quarterback, throws for 230. Not a bad stat line. 3 touchdowns, not a bad stat line. 2 picks, very bad. He was not very accurate at all. I think he really struggled reading the coverages and getting comfortable all game long. I think he struggled getting comfortable in the pocket. This is something I said, and I got pushback from somebody on Twitter, because when you look at the box score and you look at the stats, it doesn't reflect the statement. But Indiana's defensive line handled Penn State's offensive line. I think Indiana won the line of scrimmage when they were on defense and Penn State was on offense. So I'll read you this stat. Penn State ran for 250 yards. Well, JP, I thought you said Indiana won the line of scrimmage. Penn State ran for 250 yards. All right, well, let's break down what those runs look like. Sean Clifford accounted for 119 of the 250 yards Penn State had on the ground. So what that means is that the only way Penn State was really successful running the ball was in the quarterback run game, which equalizes the numbers for the offense. So the defense does not have a free player just running and hitting. Like, the defense likes to be +1 with an unblocked player to make the play. When you run the quarterback, it takes that away. Now everybody's one-on-one and you got to get off blocks and everything else. All right? So when you look at that, and then you look at the fact that some of these yards came when he was uncomfortable in the pocket and he was scrambling and pulled the ball down and ran, it brings it more into context. You take out the 120 from the 250, it leaves about $130 that the running backs had. And I think it was 4 or 5 running backs that had carries in that game. The context is when Penn State needed to run the ball for 3, 4, 5 tough yards, they couldn't run it downhill and get it. I saw a sequence where they ran the ball on 2nd down and got maybe 2 yards. They ran the ball on 3rd down, they got maybe 2 yards. And they ran the ball on 4th and 1 and could not convert. That is what I mean when I say Indiana won the line of scrimmage. Penn State and their running backs and their offensive line should be able to get a yard on 4th down when they need it. And so everybody's going to point to a lot of things that'll become the difference in the game. You say Sean Clifford turned the ball over a couple times, which he shouldn't do. You could say the 10 penalties for 100 yards is a big swing in the game. I agree. You could say going 0 for 3 on field goals, which Penn State did, is a game changer. And it was because of the margin of the game. But when you look at the fact that when you take out the quarterback runs, which I know you can't do, but when you account for those, they rush for 130 yards out of their stable of running backs. It's not a successful day running the ball. And I think that made a real big difference in the game. I think it kept Indiana in it when they needed to be. And you credit Indiana. Michael Penix Jr. was off a lot of the game. I don't think he did very well. Stevie Scott Jr. could not get Stevie Scott the third did not get the amount of yards that I thought that he would be able to get on the ground. But when it came crunch time and they needed plays, Penix Jr. to Watt Fillier for a touchdown, Michael Penix Jr., 2-point conversion. We got some questions about whether it counts or not. But he put the team on his back when he had to, and I give him a lot of credit for that. So that was a really interesting game. Now we've got Indiana. I think they're traveling to Rutgers. That'll be interesting. Do you have a letdown after a big win? Indiana, are you going to let this opportunistic, confident Rutgers team make you look bad? And then Penn State, you got Ohio State at home. It's do or die. Are you going to start 0-2? Are you going to get back on track? I don't think they will, but that's a question they'll have to answer. Purdue played Iowa. They surprised me. They really did. I was picking games on BTN this weekend. I had an Iowa win, and I had some confidence points on it. I thought that Iowa would be able to go in there and, if anything, make Purdue play an ugly game offensively so they could stay in it, and it just didn't happen. And, it got ugly at times. Purdue's quarterback, O'Connell, went for 282, threw 3 touchdowns, threw 2 interceptions, so it did get ugly at times. But they played well enough offensively to win the game. And when we talk about what it comes down to, their running back, Horvath, went for 124. Again, Penn State's stable of running backs went for 130 total. This one guy from Purdue, who Purdue averaged 89 yards a game on the ground a year ago, went for 124 himself. And I think that was a difference maker for them, because Purdue has an offense with guys like Rondale Moore, who ended up not playing, with guys like Ronnie Bell, who was a great freshman last year and is a great sophomore this year. When they can get the ball in their hands on the edges, they're successful. Purdue lacked that run game last year. Well, now they can run the ball so they can add variety to the offense. The defense can't just play in one way. And they can eat up a little bit of clock on the ground game too. I thought it was masterfully put together. They did it without their head coach, Jeff Brom, because he was out with COVID. Iowa's going through some things within their program, and I'm not going to get too far into that, but it's just really interesting to see now because of this game, the game I'm going to talk about next, and the last game that I have on my list, how wide open the Big Ten West is. But the next game, Northwestern, they were playing Maryland. Maryland's not that good. They got some players on the recruiting trail. The reality of the situation is Loxley hasn't been able to break through to them quite yet. But Northwestern played Maryland. I think the score ended up being like 49-3. Peyton Ramsey, familiar name, former Indiana quarterback, stepped in last year. Michael Penix Jr. got hurt. Did a very good job for them. He's quarterback at Northwestern now. And for folks who watched Big Ten football a year ago, you may recall that Northwestern's quarterback play was awful. It was abysmal. They averaged like 15 points a game. They must have averaged like 2 or 3 interceptions a game. I mean, it was not good football. Now they're back. Ramsey threw for 212 and a touchdown. So it wasn't, again, a big stat game, but it was an efficient offensive game for him. He found receivers in rhythm. He got those guys the ball. Really elevated everybody's play on that offense. Team ran for 325, which I think is a big story. They've got some good running backs. I think their O-line is solid, but I also think that speaks to how bad Maryland is on defense. And speaking of defense, Northwestern's defense is just ridiculous. Honestly, I think they're one of the better defenses in the Big Ten Conference. And Maryland offensively is not very good, but I didn't think that they would be as bad as only 3 points on Northwestern. But Northwestern had a fumble recovery and 3 interceptions. And when you turn the ball over 4 times, it becomes extremely hard to be competitive in football games. And Northwestern forced them into a lot of those errors. And you give them credit where credit's due. And so now it becomes a conversation of Northwestern made it to the Big Ten Conference Championship game a couple years ago, and then they fell way off and, only won, like 1 or 2 games last year. And now is it a question of, are they back in that competitive area? Is this where we start to give them a little bit of respect and credit? New offensive coordinator, new quarterback. Seems like things are rolling. Things are efficient. Defense is solid. They've always been solid. Are they a contender now? Are they somebody we should be looking out for? Time will tell, but I think it's an interesting conversation to have. Second to last game on here, Rutgers. How about it, man? I'm talking about Rutgers. And we're talking about good Rutgers. Played Michigan State, threw a party at the ball. This is the only stat line you really need to hear. 6 forced fumbles. They recovered 5 of them. Had 2 interceptions. Woo. They turned the ball, I guess, forced 7 turnovers in that game. Wow. I said this on Big Ten Network on Saturday, and I believe it to be true, so I'm going to repeat it here. That win might have been a program changer for Rutgers. And the reason I say that is when you listen to the commentary from Avery Young, who's a defensive player on that team who had 2 of those turnovers that he forced and 9 tackles and a tackle for a loss in that game, talk about the makeup of that locker room and the fact that they had guys last year that wanted to win and were fed up with losing and, they didn't feel that like they were empowered to do so. And they had a good core group of guys that they added to with transfers out of the portal, which they had a bunch of portal guys that were balling out. It speaks to the fact that Schiano has inspired them and they've truly bought into the culture. Like there's 100% buy-in now because they won the game. And I don't know how many more games they're going to win this year, but I think it might be a few more. And that'll build for them, just that team itself, for their confidence, but that also builds for recruiting. And when you consider where Rutgers is located, they've got fertile recruiting ground. They're in Jersey. They can get a couple of guys out of New York. They can get some Pennsylvania guys. They can go into the DMV, Virginia, Maryland, DC. And they can find some players. They'll get a couple guys probably out of Ohio, maybe a couple of West Virginia lunch pail hard hat kind of guys. And the point I'm getting at is now that they've instilled a culture that players buy into, and now that they have won a game in conference for the first time in 21 conference competitions, you start to build a program. And I think their trajectory can change. I do think there's a definite ceiling at Rutgers. I don't think they'll be Big Ten East champs anytime soon, if ever. But I do believe that there is an opportunity for these guys to turn that program around. So I'm happy about that. All right. And now this is a part of the show I don't like. It's the reconciliation part of the show. It's the eating crow part of the show. It's the foot and mouth part of the show. I was very bold and brazen and confident in the fact that Minnesota was going to beat Michigan. I thought that Minnesota, with Tanner Morgan and Rashad Bateman, would be very successful offensively. I believed that the ground game with 5 returning offensive linemen and Mohamed Ibrahim would be successful, which they were. I believed that Michigan's defense was going to be out of sorts, which they weren't. I believed that Joe Milton would struggle in a cold game in Minnesota, which he really didn't. And so here we are. And I'll start with the Joe Milton conversation. He did everything he needed to do. He was efficient. He was confident. He was poised. I don't think he was asked to do a ton. He threw for 225 and a touchdown. Again, not a big stat line, especially in these offenses we see today where quarterbacks are throwing for 300, 350, 400 yards consistently. They must have rushed for 200 yards. I don't even know. I didn't even check that. I might have to effort that right now. Ton of rushing yards, though. And their defense was really, really good. I mean, their defense was on point in terms of applying pressure to Tanner Morgan and covering in the back end of that defense long enough for the pressure to get there. And so when you look at all of those things in concert, it makes Joe Milton a better quarterback. When you're a young quarterback and you can rely on a defense to get stops, that's a positive. It makes your job easier. When you're a young quarterback and your team can run for 256 yards, that makes your job a lot easier. You become a better quarterback. When you're a young quarterback and you can throw a sub boot to a tight end where the ball is thrown and it's caught behind the line of scrimmage and he can take the reception for 20, 25 yards, you're going to be successful. And it's not to say that he didn't take shots down the field. And it's not to say that he wasn't good, because he was. But I think that he is in a great situation to learn and grow and flourish as a young quarterback. And I give Michigan a ton of credit for being to that point when they were, because I didn't think it was going to happen. Offensively, for Minnesota, I was disappointed because I think Tanner Morgan is the second best quarterback in the Big Ten. I still believe that. My opinion may change in the next few weeks, but I'm still there on it. And he just didn't play well. It was 18 of 31. He had a touchdown and interception. I think 197 yards pass. It wasn't that good. And for them to have won that game the way that their defense was playing, Tanner Morgan had to be a guy, and he just wasn't. And he was critical of himself, and I know he's going to get back to where he needs to be. Rashad Bateman's got to be a guy, and when you're struggling throwing the ball, it's really hard for that to happen. Muhammad Ibrahim was a guy. He went for, 130 yards on the ground or whatever the case was there. But offensively, it just wasn't together, and their defense was really struggling. So I'll be curious to see. I think Minnesota's a Friday night game this week against Maryland, so it should be a big bounce back game. Michigan's got – what do we say? Michigan State? Nope. Yep. Michigan State. Big noon Fox game. So it'll be interesting. There's history there. Michigan State isn't very good. Michigan is going to be opportunistic to look as good as they can in all of these games that they play. I'm very curious to watch these storylines develop throughout the year, because those are two top Big Ten teams that look completely different on Saturday. And we'll see how it goes. But that's kind of the recap there. Not a lot of great games coming up this weekend, honestly. You've got the Ohio State-Penn State game. That's kind of lost a little bit of its pizzazz once Penn State lost. In the consensus around Columbus, and I don't know where else, but definitely around Columbus, is Ohio State should win that game with ease. We'll see. The Buckeyes have to show up. But overall, fun first weekend. I feel like there were so many things that we learned, and I can't wait to watch these storylines as they develop. All right. So I've been talking about Manscaped on here last few weeks. They sent me a beautiful care package, had the lawnmower 3.0 in there, little LED light on it, can run forever. They sent me some ball deodorant, ball toner. They sent some boxers, everything else. The long and short of it, people, buy it. Use Manscaped. That stuff is amazing. It is so awesome. That trimmer, I can't describe. I've never used a trimmer like it before. I've never seen something. The ceramic blade, it's great. The boxers, comfortable as ever. The toner gets me right. Y'all need to try it out. And if you're going to, make sure you use the code OSU20, get you 20% off plus free shipping. It's something you need to do. Your balls will thank you when you do it. All right. So I'm going to end this show. I've got a couple of different things for you. The first thing is my word for the week, and that word is urgency. It's defined as importance requiring swift action. So our lives, I feel like a lot of times, are full of busy work. We are occupied, but I do not often think that we are urgent enough. We're not urgent in how we prioritize what keeps us busy. We are not urgent in how we complete our tasks, what effort and energy we put into it. I don't think we have a sense of urgency when it comes to building and maintaining personal relationships sometimes. And we have to switch from this mentality of busyness to a mentality of urgency. So the busyness mentality is, how many things can occupy me at once? How can I multitask? How can I get as many things done as I can? Or how can I feel like I'm getting as many things done as I can? And we should shift that into an urgency mentality of, okay, these are my priorities. I need to do this thing. I need to get it done by this time, and I need to do it with this amount of energy. Then I need to do this thing. I need to get it done by this time, and I need to do it with this amount of energy. And we need to take that to our personal relationships, where you're urgent in making sure that people know that you care and that you're listening and that you love them. And you are urgent in making sure that you can get from point A to point B so you can spend quality time. I think that our busyness, and I'm speaking a lot to myself right now, without urgency is really just spinning tires in the mud. But once we find out that thing that inspires us and we get our bearings about us, we take all of the effort, the energy, the intent that we have, and we force it into one thing, and we get it done like our hair is on fire. And I feel like that helps us improve to a place where now, instead of being busy all the time, we can be urgent when necessary. So I want y'all to take that. All right. So typically that'd be the end of the show, but it's not the end of the show because I've got something else really important to tell you. I'm probably not going to talk to you folks between now and Election Day. I don't know if my next show will be ready to go in time for everybody to hear the message on or before Election Day. So I'm going to tell you right now, I want everybody to make sure that you get out and you cast a ballot. I want you to vote. I don't care if you're voting for Trump, for Biden, third party. I don't care if you're not voting for any of them. I don't care if you're voting down ticket one party or the other. I don't care if you're only voting on your local issues. I just want people to get out there and vote. And here's the reason why. Is there was a time in this country where many people could not vote. Women, minorities were not allowed to vote. And there was a fight that ensued where people were ostracized socially and politically for being involved in that fight. Some people were brutalized, injured, and or murdered for being a part of that fight. It took politicians and legislation in many, many years. So many years, it was so recent actually that my father was able to witness some of his family as a part of that fight for said equality. And we've achieved it. So there was a fight to get here. This is the thing that people don't talk about as much, and I think just as important, is there was a fight from the opposition so we could not be here. There were people that fought aggressively to ensure that women, minorities, whomever, did not have the right to vote. They wanted poll taxes. They wanted literacy tests. They went to the polls and intimidated people. Some people were out for blood. They would kill to make an example of somebody to ensure that other people would not exercise their sacred right to vote. And people were so aggressively against rights to vote, and people were so aggressively intent on ensuring that they could vote, because your voice carries power and every vote actually does matter. So what I say to you is, right now, you need to make it a priority with some urgency to cast a ballot, whether you drop it off at one of the secure ballot boxes, whether you vote in person. I voted in person early. It was a great experience here in Central Ohio. I'm here in Delaware County. The lines moved very fast. The polling staff was great. They were kind. They answered all of the questions that we had. It was socially distanced and safe. There was sanitizer, all of the things that we need in a pandemic voting situation. But make sure you make it a priority and you do it with some urgency. And even today, there are people out there trying to make sure that you cannot vote. They want to make it hard for you to do so. They want to put as many obstacles in your way. And again, it's because it's that important. So I'll leave you all with that. As Americans, I think it is not just a right, but it is a duty for us to exercise our voice and our right to vote. And I hope that we all participate in that. So with that, I'd like to thank my all-star producer, Andrew Zolden, and the Zedia Network for letting me broadcast on this platform. I'm Joshua Perry, and this is The Joshua Perry Show.